Welcome to Crossroads. President Donald Trump has authorized quote-unquote full force as he deploys U.S. troops to Portland in an operation to protect ICE facilities and federal agents. Now, alongside this also, the DHS, Department of Homeland Security, they're going after the groups and the individuals behind all these anti-ICE attacks and movements. And also, meanwhile, new information was revealed on the undercover FBI agents who were in the crowd during the January 6 protests. I'll be talking about these topics a lot more today, so make sure to support us by hitting the like button, leave a comment, and share this episode. Now, look, first off, U.S. troops are being deployed to Portland, Oregon. They have authorization from President Donald Trump to use quote-unquote full force. Full force authorized. Now, like the operation, it aims to protect federal agents and ICE facilities, which Trump says are currently under siege from attack by Antifa and other domestic terrorists. A war on terror right here in Portland, Oregon. This is Trump on Truth Social. He says, at the request of the Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, I am directing Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, to provide all necessary troops to protect war-ravaged Portland and any of our ICE facilities from under siege from an attack by Antifa and other domestic terrorists. He said, I'm also authorizing full force if necessary. He says, thank you all for your attention to this matter. Now, like as usual, as you might expect, not everybody agrees with this, and especially not the mayor of Portland. That's Keith Wilson. He said during a news conference that no troops are needed on the streets of Portland. He said this, quote, we do not need any intervention. This is not a military target. And he added, quote, if President Trump came to Portland today, what he would find is people riding their bikes, playing sports, enjoying the sunshine, buying groceries or produce from a farmer's market. And he said that footage that's been going viral of Antifa like attacking people and attacking ICE agents and so on, he says that this is from years ago and before the city reformed its public safety system. Now, the problem you have is that while some older footage is going viral right now, there's actually a lot of new footage. In fact, even just last night, there were videos, for example, of Antifa chasing people around Portland, harassing people, threatening people. It's literally happening as recently as last night. It's ongoing. Others have noted as well. Andy No, senior editor at the Post Millennial, great example. He's been doing a lot of reporting on Antifa. He's been exposed in their activities across the United States, but especially in Portland, where he used to be from. He said in a post that Antifa is now calling to have him murdered because of his reporting on their activities in Portland. This is not from years ago. This is like just the other day. Andy No also reposted a video of himself when he was chased by Antifa members, one of the older videos from May 2021 in Portland, after the terror group recognized him because he was doing undercover reporting. They said, hey, that's Andy No. He's a reporter. They chased him. He noted he ran screaming through the streets, yelling for help. He added, quote, they caught me. Antifa tackled me to the ground, tearing my knee tendon in the process. As I slid across the pavement, they punched me over and over and tried to choke me out. He said, I barely managed to stumble in the Nines Hotel, begging the staff to call 911. Instead, they tried to force me back outside and told me to wear a COVID mask. What a dystopian hellscape. And he said, I dropped to the floor, refusing to move, pleading for them to call the police. They refused. He said after he was forced back outside, Antifa members then gathered, threatened him even more. He ran again, escaped into an elevator with a hotel guest. And finally, a nice person was able to call 911. A hospital took him in by ambulance. He had a police guard. And then after he was in the hospital, Antifa continued to post about him online, trying to track his location, trying to find out what hospital he was in so they could target him again. Even after that, he had to move his home because he had to flee Portland, and he faced ongoing threats ever since then, even again just this last week. Now, he posted examples of this. He noted on X, quote, Transtifa. Transtifa, it's like one of the more violent offshoots of Antifa, based on their former membership and ideology, most of the trans members. He said, Antifa are urging people to kill me to silence my reporting on Portland. He said this, talking about the quotes, Portland is peaceful. Big thing going around. And then he quotes one of the people threatening him saying, quote, just administer the lead pill, doctor, meaning shoot him, is what they're posting. Now, there have also been ongoing attacks from Antifa groups targeting ICE facilities in Portland. Ongoing, again, as recently as last night. You could argue a lot of this is quote-unquote non-violent. The violence oftentimes happens with scuffles. They surround people. They harass people. Even last night, there was a video coming out of a black man waving an American flag who was then surrounded by Antifa. An Asian man who was supporting that, the man with the flag, also being harassed. They chased him. They harassed him. They shoved banners in his face. When they did that, he struck the banner, making him look like the bad guy, which is how they frame these things. And also, these things have been going on for a long time. Antifa has been holding ongoing protests. This has included numerous reports, including recently groups like Antifa threatening, trying to rob people, throwing rocks and bottles at police and otherwise, throwing objects, starting fights, carrying out other actions like this, ongoing, day by day, week by week. These are not years-old videos, as some are reporting. This is recent. Now, on top of all of this, it's also important to note that President Donald Trump has designated Antifa as a major terrorist organization. Just recently, this came out. Again, Trump has, in fact, designated Antifa as a major terrorist organization. The challenge he's going to have with that is that Antifa is a kind of branched group. There are a lot of sub-factions to it, a lot of offshoots. There is money behind it. People talk about where the money comes from. It's through a long chain of organizations. There are many organizations that fund them, but they do get funding. They do have training. They do have facilities. They have, again, entire operations set up. These are not just random people dressing in all black and going out on the streets and protesting. It is an organized movement, funded, trained, paid for. They are now designated terrorists. On the point of terrorism, how do you define terrorism? It's a loose definition. There are a lot of different ways you define it. The most common definition of a terrorist is somebody who uses violence or the threat of violence to achieve a political goal. And that is the bread and butter of Antifa. Their entire focus is using violence and the threats of violence to achieve a political goal. And many conservatives who've been threatened by them, attacked by them, and so on, I've been threatened by them. After I did my COVID documentary, in fact, Antifa in Poland, for some reason, was threatening me. During Biden's inauguration, I was followed by some of them around Washington, D.C. for a bit. They harass people. It's what they do. Also, one of the big things they do is they shut down people's voices. When conservatives try to hold events, when conservatives try to protest, when they engage in their constitutional rights, Antifa members oftentimes go to their events, harass them, threaten them, attack them, which means that a lot of people are too afraid to go out and speak. A lot of people are too scared to go out and protest. It's the exact thing the Nazis did and the fascists, ironically, with the black shirts and the brown shirts. It's the exact same thing Antifa is doing. In fact, Antifa actually started as an offshoot. It was the armed branch of the Soviet Comintern in pre-Nazi Germany. And it was basically the Soviet Union's branch equivalent of the brown shirts and black shirts. That's actually where they originated. Now, in addition to this, the White House has also launched something major, a full campaign to dismantle not even just Antifa, but the entire system of far-left violence and radicalism. Anybody funding them, any organization funding them, anybody involved in the calls for violence, any group moving on that, NGOs, non-governmental organizations, nonprofits, all of these now are targets of this campaign to root out far-left violence. Again, President Donald Trump has signed this. This is now going into effect. We'll see how it looks in terms of actions, because they have not done it yet, but they have now signed it into effect. Now, alongside this, across the whole country, the Department of Homeland Security is also going after the groups and individuals who are behind the anti-ICE attacks and movements. We'll be talking more about this after we come back from a quick break.
All right, just to pause here for a super quick moment. You are, of course, watching Crossroads with Joshua Philipp. I'm just here to share a message about American Hartford Gold, my own personal gold and silver bullion dealer. Now, obviously, the recent tariffs have made the markets super turbulent and volatile. With every new piece of tariff news, the markets seem to either crash up or crash down. And of course, it's worth mentioning that these conditions don't only affect Wall Street. They affect all of us through our investments and our retirement accounts. That's why I'd like to introduce you to a company that I trust and I myself use to secure my own savings, American Hartford Gold. They specialize in helping Americans move our assets into something tangible, into something you can actually hold, which is physical gold and physical silver, two precious metals that act as a hedge against all those decisions being made in Washington, D.C. They have an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. They have thousands of 5-star reviews, and they make the whole buying process super simple. Your metals can be shipped directly to your door, or you can transfer your current retirement account to a tax-advantaged gold IRA. And the best part is that right now, American Hartford Gold is offering an exclusive offer. When you call them today and you mention the name Joshua, you could receive up to $15,000 in free silver with your initial investment. Take advantage of their special offer. You can either just call them at 877-260-2764 or text Joshua to 65532. All their information will also be down in the description box below. And now, back to Crossroads.
Welcome back. The Department of Homeland Security is going after the groups and the individuals behind the anti-ICE attacks and their movements. Now, this is happening across the country, the entire United States. Just News said this. They say federal officials are launching a government-wide effort to crack down on those financially and logistically supporting the targeting of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE officers, and their operations after the deadly attack at an ICE facility in Dallas earlier this week. They said during an interview on Just the News' No Not Noise TV program, Department of Homeland Security Assistant Secretary Tricia McLaughlin said the shooting, the recent one, was the result of premeditated planning and suggested that online tools and nonprofit networks are contributing to targeting federal officers. On that point also, there's even an app available on the iTunes App Store, where people can even download that and track ICE. That has been allowed to happen. There are many companies involved with this, approving it, allowing it. Different news networks have posted these kinds of things. Spanish language radio stations have been broadcasting the locations of ICE officers. There have even been public officials making calls to track them, protest against them, which is, you're legally allowed to protest. But tracking them, targeting them, blocking their operations, that's kind of where the line is drawn. Now, Mike Benz, Executive Director of the Foundation for Freedom Online, also posted examples of how Antifa-aligned websites have been posting information on their strategies that they are using to terrorize ICE. He said this: Antifa websites, totally open to the public, explicitly call to so utterly terrorize ICE that federal agents are physically afraid to enter a city. He said if the Proud Boys wrote this about the FBI, how fast would every single person around that website be indicted by Merrick Garland? Which, again, if you understand what's happened in this country over the last 10 plus years, conservatives who do anything close to what Antifa does are very quickly punished for it. When he's talking about, for example, the Proud Boys, for a bit that was like the right-wing equivalent of Antifa. It was groups that when Antifa was going out and attacking conservatives, a group of more conservative types, although kind of extreme also, came out to fight Antifa. What happened? Well, they went out and actually fought Antifa, and you saw Antifa get their faces beat in. Very quickly, in fact, because they're not very strong, frankly. People can fight them very easily, and when they do, Antifa almost always loses, unless they engage in like mob tactics. What was happening was people were going out and fighting them. What then happened? The Proud Boys were designated a gang. The Proud Boys were shut down. The Proud Boys were investigated. The Proud Boys were arrested. Nothing of that sort happened to Antifa. Justice was meted out on one side, but not the other. There was only justice on one side of the aisle. Antifa was able to operate with relative protection. There are officers not allowed to do much about it. They were never really arrested. There are groups, lawyer groups, that even defend them when they are arrested. They're oftentimes let out back on the street almost immediately. And again, some governors have gone after the conservative side, but not Antifa. Even when Antifa was taking over city blocks in Seattle, it was called the Summer of Love. It was allowed to take place. They've not faced repercussions. They've been allowed to terrorize the public through mostly local level protection. Now, Mike Benz adds this. He says, same Antifa website worrying about a federal crackdown on massive liberal institutions sponsoring the Antifa networks just fearlessly flaunts federal law by organizing, quote, no-go zones for federal forces that make police afraid to enter for their safety. Let me show you the actual website. This is the website he points to, and it does in fact detail the strategies that some groups are in fact using against ICE. The actual website calls for a kind of systematic strategy. It calls first to form resistance groups, Antifa, NGOs, protest groups, then to establish community assemblies, build a communication system, again, secure communications oftentimes, so they can talk to each other and organize, to then strategize and set a, quote, combative example, meaning fight. They say then, quote, compel local politicians to break off cooperation with federal authorities, which they actually advocate using force to do, trying to force politicians to do this. And then they want to, quote, create no-go zones for federal forces, using fear and threats to make federal officers too afraid to enforce the law, and then to, quote, create mutual aid networks, organizations, in other words. Let me show you what it actually says directly. It says, quote, it calls to, quote, map the infrastructure and support institutions that ICE depends on, to publicize their vulnerabilities, popularize simple, reproducible ways to impose consequences. What are the consequences they want to impose, but they want to do it? And to, quote, aim to choose the time and place of confrontations. By the way, these are unconventional warfare tactics. They're actually employing actual guerrilla warfare tactics on the streets of the United States. Now they're designated a terrorist group. They're actually operating as an official terrorist group in these kinds of operations. It also says this, to, quote, pressure local politicians, public institutions, and other influential groups to concretely oppose ICE operations rather than simply standing aside. The consequences, it says, of cooperating with ICE, whether actively or passively, must be worse than the consequences of not doing so. What kind of consequences are they suggesting here? The consequences of supporting ICE need to be worse? What are they suggesting? And they also state that if, quote, ICE agents hesitate to enter certain areas without backing from police, National Guard, and Marines, that will limit their operations. Basically what they're saying, they want to make it so that ICE agents are afraid to go to certain places unless they have protection from police, National Guard, and Marines. They're actually advocating for this. They want to use fear. Now, what would actually make ICE agents too afraid to enter an area? Well, the threat of violence, the threats against their families, the doxing operations, which has been ongoing. People are even finding the identities of the ICE agents, even tracking them, following to their homes, and threatening their families. In California, Governor Gavin Newsom has signed a bill to force ICE agents to show their faces. The federal government says it will not comply with the orders of California to force federal officers to show their faces, because the only thing showing their faces will accomplish is allowing them to be threatened by movements like this. That is the only difference it would make. It would allow them to be threatened. And there are people who want that. Now, we've actually seen this model get used by many of the radical groups all across the United States. What is interesting in the United States is that many of the protests you see, whether it's the anti-ICE protests in Los Angeles, whether it's the protests in Portland against ICE and otherwise, whether it was the No Kings riots and protests, oftentimes they're organized by the same groups. The quote-unquote No Kings protests, which again were branded at least as being grassroots, was actually organized by 190 organizations, publicly listed. Not all of them are that extreme. There were some moderate ones as well, but some of them were. Organizations like the ones carrying out the protests in Los Angeles were more extreme. You actually do have a network of communist organizations, directly communist, Communist Party USA affiliates, some of which even have foreign funding, including in China, by the way, and foreign operations coming from China. These movements and these groups, what they do is anytime there's a popular issue in the United States, they then form an NGO, a non-governmental organization, to support that type of movement. Movements were started around Black Lives Matter. Movements were started around the pro-Gaza protests. Movements are now being started around the anti-ICE operations by the same parent organizations, which basically, like the tentacles of an octopus, reach out and create different movements across the United States based on what is a popular issue. This is actually how they operate. Now, what we're seeing with the United States is that Donald Trump is now targeting the head of the octopus, so to speak. Not just the tentacles or the most surface, again, elements of it, oftentimes the people on the ground protesting, but the people pulling the strings, the people funding it, the people doing the trainings, the people doing the operations. We have not seen this. I've been saying for many years that what you're watching on the surface is oftentimes little more than a puppet show. You're watching the puppets, you're not watching the people pulling the strings. They're now going after the people pulling the strings. That's the big difference we see now taking place. Now, speaking of the attacks on ICE facilities, there was the recent incident where an individual shot at an ICE facility. The individual killed 2 people. It turned out the people he shot and killed were people being detained by ICE. He also wounded others, and then he killed himself. Now, the legacy media is treating this as one big mystery. They're saying, well, we don't know the motive of the shooter. Was he anti-ICE? Was he just crazy? Probably both. Was he a conservative trying to kill migrants? There are some even saying that. Now let's break down the evidence. Let's look at the actual evidence, and I'll show you what the media is saying. The Washington Free Beacon did a great review of some of the reporting. They collected a lot of it. Here's what they said. They say the 29-year-old man who opened fire on an ICE facility in Dallas, that's Joshua Yan, wrote, quote, he wrote anti-ICE, as in, again, federal agents, anti-ICE on one of his bullets, as the FBI announced soon after the politically motivated attack. So he writes anti-ICE on a bullet. What does that tell you about his motives? It says here, law enforcement officials later revealed that this individual, Yan, left a note saying he hoped the attack would, quote, give ICE agents real terror and, quote, inflict maximum lethality against ICE personnel. So he wrote anti-ICE on his bullet. He also stated in a note that he wanted to give ICE agents real terror and maximize lethality against personnel, meaning kill them. What could the motive be? Is that a clearly stated motive? I would say so. But mainstream media is saying otherwise. They're saying this. Back to this article. It says mainstream media outlets nonetheless portrayed Yan's motive as, quote, unclear, and criticized Republicans, namely President Donald Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance, who said otherwise in the wake of the shooting. They say, here's a roundup of how those outlets covered the attack. They have a great breakdown of it. They point to several reports all across the legacy media. One of them, the New York Times. This is what the New York Times said. Quote, the actual motivation behind messages written on the bullets in both Mr. Kirk's assassination, the killing of Charlie Kirk, and Wednesday's killing, the shooting at Dallas, are still not known. And the Times has not confirmed details shedding light on the ammunition casing in Dallas. They just don't know. It quotes NPR as well, which wrote, quote, authorities have not indicated any specific motive. No motive known. And they say, quote, but they did release a picture of 5 unspent bullet casings found at the scene, and one had the words anti-ICE. Immigration and immigrants, they say, have been at the center of the political divide, often portrayed in a negative light. And yesterday, some immigrants became victims of this political rhetoric. They're actually suggesting that immigrants were victimized by political rhetoric because they were shot by a guy. And they're not saying that the motive is known. Someone just went and shot some immigrants who were victimized by political rhetoric. That's what they're framing it as. They also quote many other news outlets basically saying the same thing. If you were reading or watching mainstream media, that's what you would understand as reality. That's what they're saying. Now, if you were to read some of those quotes, you could easily assume this was an anti-illegal immigrant killing, that people are radicalized against illegal immigrants because of the mean words of President Donald Trump. And that's the way that the media is framing it in many regards. They're not framing it as crazy people being radicalized against ICE and deportation operations. Radicalized, I'd say, even by irresponsible reporting like what they're doing. Personally, I think the motive is pretty dang clear. The guy literally wrote anti-ICE on one of his bullets. He actually stated in a note his motive, give ICE agents real terror and inflict maximum lethality against ICE personnel. If I were to say what the motive was, he probably wanted to, quote, maximize lethality against ICE personnel, meaning he wanted to give ICE agents real terror. He wants to scare ICE and use violence against them, and he believed that his bullets were the anti-ICE antidote. I don't think you need Sherlock Holmes to figure this out. Now, look, personally, I'd say the motive is clear as day. I would add that many of these news outlets are either clueless or knowingly lying to people. Many of them have slapped labels on motives in the past. They oftentimes do label people that turn out to not be accurate when it's on the other side, using a lot less evidence than this. Many of these exact same news outlets very frequently prescribe a motive when it's on the other side. Yeah, even when it's fake, for example. Very often they jump to conclusions. Very often they come out and say this is, radical right-wing violence. And they more than often lie about it. So they lie on one side, they cover it up on the other. This is very strange reporting, and I think it is utterly irresponsible. Now look, meanwhile, new information was revealed on undercover FBI agents who were in the crowd during the January 6th protests. This is starting a lot of discussion on the internet. Now look, first off, this is what President Donald Trump had to say on the new information that just came out. Trump on Truth Social, he said, quote, it was just revealed that the FBI had secretly placed, against all rules, regulations, protocols, and standards, 274 FBI agents into the crowd just prior to and during the January 6th hoax. Trump is calling the whole thing around J6 now a hoax. Trump says, quote, this is different from what Director Christopher Wray stated over and over again, suggesting that Christopher Wray may have lied. And Trump said, that's right. As it now turns out, FBI agents were at and in the January 6th protest. Probably, Trump says, probably acting as agitators and insurrectionists, but certainly not as, quote, law enforcement officials. Trump says, I want to know who each and every one of these so-called agents are and what they were up to on that now historic day. Trump says, many great American patriots were made to pay a very big price only for the love of their country. I owe this investigation of dirty cops and crooked politicians to them. He said Christopher Wray, the then director of the FBI, has some major explaining to do. He says that's 2 in a row, Comey and Wray, who he says have been caught lying with our great country at stake. Remember, James Comey, former FBI director, has now been indicted, by the way. They're actually not doing what they did to individuals like Roger Stone during the Biden administration, where they actually raided his home, pre-dawn raid. even brought little inflatable rafts to cross his very small stream, tipped off CNN, who had reporters there. CNN also somehow got the sealed indictment sent to them, which they then sent to Roger Stone for comment. Arrested Roger Stone, did the perp walk, being dragged out by agents. Comey's basically accused of the same crime as Roger Stone was, and Comey's not getting pre-dawn raids. He's not being treated in the same light, which some people are raising questions about because it's the shoe on the other foot issue. Is the law being practiced equally on both sides of the aisle? No, it is not. It is not. But James Comey's being given, I believe, until October 7th to surrender, or around then. So that is currently happening. We'll see what happens with this because Trump is now saying that Christopher Wray, also former FBI director, was caught lying. Trump adds, quote, "We can never let this happen to America again." Now, look, in response to this discussion, and there's been a lot of it going on because people, based on Trump's statements, are now wondering were these FBI agents doing something they shouldn't have been doing there. In fact, a clip from one of my investigations has been going viral. Elon Musk was posting about it as well. It's a clip from my January 6th documentary showing some of the very peculiar individuals breaking windows, breaking into the Capitol building, and people trying to stop them from doing it. Now, in response to this whole discussion, FBI Director Kash Patel came out and actually explained what the role of the FBI assets on January 6th was. And this is what Kash Patel says. He said, quote, 274 FBI agents were thrown into crowd control on January 6th against FBI standards. He said that failure was on corrupt leadership. Thanks to agents stepping up, the truth is coming out. Transparency, justice, accountability. So what Kash Patel is saying, the big answer to what were all these agents doing, he says basically as things got out of control on January 6th, and remember Kash Patel, even in my documentary, was one of the first people who came out and actually made it clear that Donald Trump had in fact authorized the deployment of the National Guard. The authorization to deploy the National Guard for security was not accepted by local officials. And so any operations that could have prevented what took place on January 6th were stopped. What happened instead is the FBI agents who were there had to get involved in crowd control, according to, again, Kash Patel, the current FBI director. And Kash Patel is saying the blame is not on the agents. He says the agents stepped up. They had to try to stop things from getting out of hand, and that's what they were trying to do. He says, quote, that failure was on corrupt leadership. And Trump, notably, is also calling out the leaders of the FBI, the former leaders, and they might go after him. Trump is suggesting they're doing this. James Comey, they're already going after him. Now, is this politicized justice? Many people argue that it is. Many people also argue that justice was already politicized, and the people behind the politicization of justice are now facing justice. Believe which side you would like, but that's where things are at currently. That said, questions, comments, anything you want to talk about, leave it in the chat. Let's jump into a discussion. Real quick, first off, again, I'm back in New York. We had great events out in California. It was actually great getting to meet a lot of you. Realityisreal.com finally got to meet you in person. I know you're big in the chat. A few of the other regular viewers were there. It was great getting to meet you all. We're going to be doing those events in California probably every 3 months. And we also have a lot more planned across the country. We're going to be doing a lot of great stuff, so stay tuned for more announcements on that. First question, Ashley from California. You're saying it's really a shame that it's taking the federal government to bring order to major cities. The state, county, and city have failed at their jobs. Yeah, and you know, this is the challenge, I think, for the United States, because I've been thinking about this. Do I support federalization of law enforcement? No, I don't. In fact, if I were to talk about my views on law enforcement, if I were to make the perfect country, I would actually use the model of the sheriffs as the model of law enforcement across the United States, where the sheriff is an elected official. The people vote for him. The sheriff's only real job technically is to make sure the Constitution is being enforced. If an unconstitutional law is implemented, the sheriff can choose to not enforce it. And the sheriff can appoint deputies, sheriff's deputies, who then become the police. I believe that is the constitutional form of law enforcement in the United States. And I believe that's what the Founding Fathers intended. If I were to create the perfect form of law enforcement, I would use the model of the sheriffs for all law enforcement in America, where the chief is an elected official. The American people vote for them, meaning they're independent from the governors and mayors. They're independent even from the president himself. And so that is the way the Founding Fathers set up law enforcement in America. If I were to enforce the law, that is the model I would use for police, for federal law enforcement, everything. I don't like the idea of having personal guards, so to speak, of, again, individuals who can do what they like with them. On that point, though, my belief on that is not absolute. In fact, I actually believe that any absolute is oftentimes flawed, because the challenge we have in the United States right now is, again, that local law enforcement is not able to enforce the law. They're being restricted in many areas. You have district's attorney who are overriding even the sheriffs. In fact, I've spoken to sheriff's deputies. They do huge investigations, take down gangs, arrest the criminals, file all the paperwork. Before they're even done filing the paperwork, the people they just arrested are being let out back on the streets. It's extremely discouraging for them. There are officers dealing with this, and I'm talking about sheriffs, right? Sheriff's deputies. They're dealing with that. And so what do you do if the police are not allowed to do their job because of a political machine that is basically allowing criminals to do what they like? When you have, for example, low crime rates because crime is not being treated as crime. This is actually one of the big arguments in Portland, Oregon right now. People are saying, what do you mean there's violence and problems in Portland? What do you mean that ICE agents are being attacked? What do you mean it's not safe there? Are you crazy? Look at the crime stats. It's fine. There are no people being arrested for attacking ICE officers. There are no people being arrested for attacking and beating up critics who try to challenge them. There are no people being arrested for violence or threats or anything else. The problem is it's happening and people are not being arrested for doing it. That's the problem. People are being allowed to do this without any repercussions. And the repercussions are meted out when it's the other side. A big problem also when it comes to media, the way it frames these types of things, when they say there's a spike in right-wing extremism, and not on the left. The problem is first on how you define right and left, because oftentimes they do prescribe guilt on the right without any due evidence. And the other problem is they oftentimes do not enforce the law when it's on the other side of the aisle. Is crime a crime if you don't prosecute it? Is a physical assault if they don't get arrested for it? That's the problem we have in the United States. You can lower crime stats by just not enforcing the law. And many local governments have not been enforcing the law politically when it's a partisan issue like this. That's the big problem. And so what do you do in a situation like that? I mentioned my personal view would be, no, you don't federalize law enforcement. In fact, I would actually say I'm on the very opposite footing of that. I believe that law enforcement should be elected by the American people, as the sheriffs are, if I were to make it perfect, right? But at the same time, when it comes to this, I don't think there's any other option, in my personal opinion. Because again, you have Americans who are in fact being terrorized. The American people are being terrorized. And you might say, what do you mean terrorized, Josh? What is the definition of being terrorized? It's when you're too afraid to speak out. You're afraid to make your voice heard. You're afraid to enforce the law if you're an ICE agent. There are groups stating publicly that they're organizing, communicating, protesting, and everything with the intent of making federal officers afraid to enforce the law, that they want to make consequences for politicians who allow them to enforce the law. You have organizations that are basically usurping local districts in the United States and using fear as a method of political control. That is, if you were to step back, that is what is happening on the streets of the United States. There are also conservatives who are afraid to protest. They're afraid to go out. They're afraid to engage in their constitutional rights because they don't want to get doxxed. They don't want to have their families threatened. They don't want to get beaten. Many of them believe that if they get into a fight, they will be arrested and the people who attacked them will not be. They'll be sued and the people who attacked them will not be. And because of the way the system works, and unfortunately there are a lot of activists within the entire system, they believe, many of them, that they are more likely to face repercussions and the other side's going to get off scot-free. Is that justice? Is that proper? No, it is not. And if there are people using violence and the threats of violence as tools of suppression, is that something the federal government should tolerate? I believe no, it should not. And so, while generally I do believe in a very localized form of law enforcement, again, the model of the sheriffs, do I support the idea of the federal government federalizing law enforcement in order to put down problems like this? I've gone in my head if there's any other way to accomplish it, and I don't know if there is. I do believe the problem is severe. I believe that America is in fact being subverted by very nefarious movements, many of which have foreign ties. And I believe that the problem of ideological subversion, as we currently observe it, has been going on for a very long time. During the time of the Soviet Union, many movements like this were sponsored by the Soviet Comintern. Many movements were actually being supported by actual communist groups, which, if you were a communist during the Soviet Union, anywhere in the world, it meant that you had sworn allegiance to the Soviet Union as the leader of the Comintern, the Communist International. These days, many of them are loyal to the Chinese Communist Party. The Chinese Communist Party has funding. The Chinese Communist Party has various operations propping up these groups, training, and so on. And you also have remnant organizations from the ones that were established by the Soviets. Many of these have been developing for decades in the United States to become relative grassroots movements. Many of them have massive funding, massive backing, and massive scale. And they are doing this with the intent of, again, destabilizing the United States and carrying out actions of ideological subversion. They are subverting the United States, trying to usurp our form of government through the tools of, again, infiltration and destabilization. What you're watching is a color revolution. They are launching a color revolution in the United States with the intent of destroying what our country is. That is what's happening in the United States right now. And so, what do you do against that? I don't know if there's any other solution than having the federal government step in to investigate it at the very least and prosecute the individuals if they do find people responsible for that. I don't know if there's any other option for it. I would actually add to this one more thing. The Chinese Communist Party's United Front operations represent everything they're trying to the federal government's trying to investigate right now. Mass movements across the United States, hundreds of organizations, they call them tongs, established all across the United States. Operations both on the public side, subverting the American government, trying to subvert businesses, news agencies, inviting them on trips, using threats, blackmail, bribery as tools of control of influencers in the United States, Hollywood, elected officials, business leaders, journalists. Many of them are in fact in the pockets of the Chinese Communist Party through the United Front's operations. That's what they aim to do. They operate in every major city of the United States. They operate in American campuses, university campuses, through the Chinese Student and Scholar Associations, the CSSAs, through the Confucius Institutes, and through the Little Red Schools all across the United States. They operate within American communities, not just the Chinese secret police stations, which are still operating in the United States, but also through the tongs in general. There are hundreds of them all across America, hundreds upon hundreds. Many of them have thousands, tens of thousands, some claim to have hundreds of thousands of members, actively subverting the United States, actively trying to take over America from within. Many of these groups are also involved in election activities, busing people around for votes, using straw donors, using other things like this. Many of them are also engaged in crime. In fact, the triads, the Chinese mafia, operates under many of the tongs. They're engaged in fentanyl, human trafficking, slave labor, and otherwise. These are all over America. Almost nothing has ever been done to dismantle them. Almost nothing. And the intent of this, in Xi Jinping's own words, is to use them as a, quote, magic weapon against the United States. A magic weapon. For the Chinese Communist Party, this is warfare, and they are actively engaged in the movements to destabilize the United States and to subvert our government, to co-opt our government, to infiltrate government agencies, to influence government officials, to get agents of the Chinese Communist Party jobs within federal agencies, and then to puppeteer our government against the American people and in favor of the Chinese Communist Party. This is happening as we speak. I agree the problem of Antifa is a big deal. It is the tip of the iceberg. It is the tip of a very, very big iceberg that will destroy our country if nothing is done to stop it. That's what's happening in America right now. Another question, or TMA, you're saying, Josh, does this latest war against our domestic terrorists count as one of the wars the CCP was planning on? I don't think the CCP was planning on this. So I was talking before about the Chinese Communist Party trying to get America involved in several wars. They want us in a war with Russia. They want us in a war in the Middle East against terrorists. They wanted a war with us fighting actually in Latin America. They actually wanted Brazil. And they wanted, of course, to invade Taiwan and have us focused there as well. By dividing the United States between 4 wars, they believed they could defeat the U.S. military. That's what the CCP was actually planning. The public reports on this came from Qin Canrong, one of the main advisors to Xi Jinping, the head of the Chinese Communist Party. On that point, Trump is suggesting now that he looks like he's going to back Zelensky in the war against Russia. Trump is saying that Russia may be in over its head, and Trump is now saying that he believes Ukraine can actually win the war against Russia. It's not clear what Trump is going to do with that, but Trump is using financial pressure now, both to cripple Russia and to cripple the Chinese Communist Party. They're actually doing that now. Without U.S. money, without foreign investment, without all these things, the CCP has very little power. The Chinese Communist Party is not powerful internally, it's powerful externally. Internally, the CCP is very weak. It's very brittle right now. Most of the power of the regime is in the United Front and global operations to influence foreign governments, businesses, and media. That's the main power of the CCP, is foreign, not domestic. In terms of the other wars, we'll see what happens with terrorism in the Middle East. It seems Trump has mostly stopped that. Iran was the main puppeteer with that. They're trying to dig their agents out of the rubble still right now, so they're not doing so hot. In terms of Latin America, it is possible there could be a U.S. war in Venezuela. In fact, they're talking about that right now as we speak. There's been some public reporting that the U.S. is preparing for broader operations in Venezuela. We'll see how that goes. Unless we get engaged in a long war, that will be a domestic battle. That will be a localized battle, I mean, not within the United States. People ask, well, what about all the Venezuelans who came here? What about the gangs and mafia? You have to look at their motivation. What is the motivation of a cartel or a mafia or these types of people or gangs? It's financial interest. What is their motivation? Make money. What is the motivation of having money? To live a better life. What is the difference between them and Islamic terrorists? For Islamic terrorists, the motivation is they believe that by killing people they get into heaven. Technically, it's blood sacrifice. They believe in human sacrifice as a way of getting to heaven. So they believe that killing people will give them access to heaven. They're actually practicing human sacrifice, right? That's what they're doing. The people who are coming to the United States as gangs and cartels and so on, their motivation is to live a better life and to make money. Take away, if the choice then is to go out and become terrorists, they're not going to do it. They're not going to do it. Because what is the motivation for ending your life to defend something you don't really care about? There is no motivation unless it's ideological. So there is no motivation for them. I do not believe that will lead to domestic problems. It'll be a localized battle in Latin America. We'll see how long Trump drags it out for, but that's where things are currently at with that. Now, the question that TMA is asking about, does what Trump is doing qualify as a war the CCP would want? No. The Chinese Communist Party's interest is basically in sparking division among Americans. They want Americans fighting with each other. So the method of ideological subversion works on 4 tiers. Demoralize, destabilize, conflict, and normalization. This was noted by Yuri Bezmenov, a former Soviet defector who's unfortunately now no longer with us. The demoralization, so the active measures of the Soviets, the tongs of the Chinese Communist Party, they focus on this, right? They want to subvert what they call the civil society, to start popular movements, to get leadership in their pockets, to puppeteer things, right? They don't want the hands of the puppets being seen. They want the focus to be on the puppets. You're watching a shadow play, right? It's a little shadow. You're watching the walls of the cave, and there's puppets on the shadows. You're not supposed to see what is making the shadow puppets, right? They want us focused on this on the ground so that we're fighting with each other. They don't want us to see the tongs pulling the strings. They don't want us to see the international organizations pulling the strings. They don't want us to see the international movement and intent of that movement behind the individuals pulling the strings. They don't want that being seen. And so the interest of the Chinese Communist Party is again the same as the Soviets. Let me explain this. The first step is demoralization. You lose hope in the system. You no longer believe in the integrity of your government. You no longer believe in law enforcement. You no longer believe that your neighbor is your friend. You no longer believe in healthy tribal relationships. And when I say this, I'm referring to kind of a broader way to view a civilization. A civilization is a coming together of various tribes in order to form a government. All empires had various tribes. That's races, that's religions, that's cultures, which can set aside some of their differences in order to find commonality of a common belief, which is what forms a government. During the Roman Empire, of course, you had many tribes, many tribes. In the United States, we also have many tribes, different religions, different beliefs, different denominations, many denominations, different races, many different cultures, and it's because of these peaceful relations of our tribes that we have a government. The Maoist strategy under Mao Zedong, again, of the Chinese Communist Party, was to basically use tribalism to incite popular movements, to divide people, to drive wedges between people. That's part of the efforts of destabilization. And so the CCP has been trying to destabilize the United States using divisions. They want us fighting each other. So first step, demoralize. Make you demoralized, make you hopeless, make you distrustful of your neighbor. Next step, destabilize. Make it so the system does not actually function. Break it down. Turn the agencies against the American people. That's a big problem with the infiltration of our government by Chinese Communist Party agents, many of whom came up in the CSSAs, the Chinese Student Scholar Associations, and were groomed to apply for jobs within the FBI, the CIA, the local law enforcement, within the IRS, within businesses, within the media. The CCP has been doing this for decades, and it has many agents currently in our system. The American system has, in fact, been infiltrated by foreign spies to a large extent. From that, they want to destabilize, to make the system no longer function, or to make it serve an opposite function. That it becomes, instead of working as something that represents the American people, to instead become something that represents a foreign interest. And through the foreign interest, use the arms of the system in the interests of a foreign government. The Chinese Communist Party in this one example. Targeting its enemies, targeting its critics, shutting down issues, turning, maybe even puppeteering the system so that it supports law enforcement and things on one side of the aisle, but not the other. It weaponizes it against the other. That would be destabilization. From there, they want conflict, the third stage. Conflict is civil war. Conflict is fights on the streets. Conflict is riots and counter-riots. Conflict is when we're no longer able to live peacefully between the tribalist groups that form a nation. Conflict, fighting, the destruction of the nation. And from there, they want normalization. Once the things are on fire, they come in and they say, we are here to bring you peace. We're here to bring you security. We're here to bring you order. And people will accept that. They will accept things they would have never normally accepted because they are so desperate for law and order. When communists come in, what do? Well, there's no more riots. They kill them. There's no more protests. They kill them. There's no more people calling for the overthrow of the government. They kill them. There's no more Antifa. They kill them. There's no more little red guards like in China. Mao Zedong sent them off to the countryside. The first people who stand up against the wall once the communists take over are shot, are ironically the people who help bring it into power, because they no longer want chaos. They no longer want destabilization. They take the people who they used for that and they throw them in the garbage and they kill them. That's the first stage. And so that's why you have all these influencers now being like, oh, wow, China doesn't put up with this. The Chinese Communist Party doesn't put up with this. Why do we? It's because they kill them. Because they want the Communist Party to not have challenges. It's the same reason they censor the internet. It's the same reason they target people through every other means. They don't want destabilization. They want a communist regime that dominates everything and cannot be challenged or criticized. And the problem we have with destabilization operations, demoralization, destabilization, and conflict is that it's meant to make you desire that. Things become so difficult that people are willing to accept that. You should not want that. You should not want to live under a dystopian tyranny. You should not want to live in a society with no freedom like that. They make you desire that through active measure operations to destabilize and destroy your country. That's what they're doing. And so, does the CCP want what Trump is doing? No. The CCP wants to maintain what it's doing. What Trump is doing is going after the groups funding, organizing, and so on. I pray to God that as Trump does this, he goes after the Chinese Communist Party organizations that are the main puppeteers. I pray to God that Trump looks at that if they do these operations. Because if they do the opposite, and they only go after things that are politically divisive, and only go after the domestic groups, and only go after the little puppets on the ground, will play right into the hand of what the CCP wants. They need to go after the hands pulling the strings. And the CCP is the largest body that does that. They're the largest system that does that. Hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of organizations. This has been my life's work. I've faced death threats exposing this. I've lived a very difficult life for the past two decades. My 20th anniversary of as a journalist comes up soon. Looking into this, because I believe it is such a threat against the United States that it would be irresponsible of me not to do it. I hope that one day people become aware of what I've uncovered and what the Epoch Times has been reporting on this, because this is the greatest threat to the United States. We've been trying to warn people for decades, 20 years now. And I do hope that as they carry these efforts out, I do hope they look into the CCP's organizations carrying this out across the United States. Another question, TRO-EUS, you're saying, no amount of laws and law enforcement can replace a moral and virtuous society. Without personal responsibility, it becomes everyone else's fault. I agree. And that's actually a problem of any dispute. You know, I was at Charlie Kirk's memorial. Geez, when was that? 2 weeks ago. A week ago? My sense of time's terrible because I've been doing a lot of reporting. I've been pretty busy the past couple weeks. And something really struck me. So maybe many of you saw the video, Erica Kirk, the wife of Charlie Kirk. She doesn't want to be called the widow. She says she is the wife of Charlie Kirk. She came out and spoke on stage, and she addressed the man who killed her husband. And you know what she said? She said, "I forgive you." What a powerful thing, right? What a powerful thing to say. And you actually had many people saying very similar things. A lot of people, the feeling there was something I've never seen in my life. There was mourning for Charlie Kirk, but it was very positive also. The feeling was of almost like, I mentioned, it was almost like a religious revival. It felt like people were turning back to God. And it was interesting to see. And as part of that, forgiveness was one of the big themes. And you might say, well, look, how do you forgive someone who just murdered, who carried out a political assassination? Forgiveness does not mean you don't believe in justice. He's going to still face justice. Justice is in the hands of God, right? To get religious on you. Justice is in the hands of God, but justice is also in the hands of the government. Trump came out publicly and he said, look, I don't forgive anyone, basically. Trump's like, good on Charlie Kirk for loving his enemies. Trump says, I hate my enemies. And as the president of the United States, he's the one who's in charge of the systems that's supposed to make all of our lives safe and protect us from the wolves that seek to devour us, right? That's part of the reason government exists. And so Trump, in the position of government, if you're the government, you're the sheepdog, or you're the shepherd, and the police are the sheepdogs, right? In fact, a lot of police they call themselves that. They call themselves sheepdogs. They're the sheepdogs. They're there to protect you from the wolves. The sheep sometimes don't like the sheepdogs because they look like wolves and sometimes they nip at their heels. But they're there to protect you from the wolves. If you've not had to face the wolves, you might think, hey, why do we need the sheepdogs? And that's a problem, unfortunately, of a society that's sometimes a little too comfortable. A functioning legal system, a functioning system of law, you don't see the wolves. You don't deal with the wolves. And you might believe the wolves don't exist. You might believe that, we can get rid of all of this because everything is so safe. You don't realize why you're safe. But back to the point, right? Justice is in the hands of God, but justice is also in the hands of the government. It's one of the main reasons that we, among ourselves, institute government, to protect us from the wolves, right? But on a personal level, the air at the event was forgiveness. That on a personal level, we should be forgiving. And that's interesting because one thing that was brought up is that disputes go back and forth until one side forgives the other. Blood feuds, like family feuds, wars, tribal wars. You have entire countries that cannot ever create a stable country because of tribal wars, Because one side has a blood feud and they want vengeance, and then when they carry out their vengeance, they kill the other side, and the other side wants vengeance, and they kill them, and they kill them, and they go back and forth, sometimes for hundreds of years. And they can never create a stable society. There's the problem, this is a problem that's existed throughout most of human history. You have individuals who do that, feuds among neighbors, people feuding with each other and fighting with each other, people feuding with each other among family, until one side forgives the other and says, I'm not going to seek vengeance. Religion teaches us to forgive. I don't know about all religions, but I think the good ones do. It teaches forgiveness. And what was interesting to see at the Charlie Kirk Memorial was, as part of the religious revival, people were talking about forgiveness. And so, as Tro-EUS says, no amounts of law and law enforcement can replace a moral and virtuous society. It's true that order comes from two directions. Order comes from external systems, right? The law, police, and so on. But moral order, the inner order, the order that comes from individual morality and self-restraint, is the true form of order. Without that, you can only have an ordered society to the extent that law can extend its arms. And that's the problem you have under communist systems, which actively destroy human morality and then replace religion and human morality with a totalitarian system. You can only create stability to the extent you can monitor people and to the extent you can watch them. Monitor their communications, watch them in their homes, surveillance states, overabundant systems of rules and laws and stacks of everything, because people cannot live peacefully without that, because they no longer have internal restraint. It is true that the greater form of order comes from within. And so I think you need a bit of both in a healthy society, but it is true that on an individual level, what can we do? Well, morality is the bedrock of a virtue, is the bedrock of a stable society. It really is. That said, please share this episode, help us get the word out. Let me know in the chat what you think. Do you agree with Trump's moves to federalize justice? Do you think that we can create a virtuous and good society? What do you think we need to do? How do we balance these two things? Let me know what you think in the chat. Join me also tomorrow, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time, for the next episode. In the meantime, thank you all so much for being here. And as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, stay free. Thank you.